If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good. This is the UK special edition of Green is Good. Today we are so honored to have as our first guest Andy Hobsbawm, who's on with us from the UK. Andy is an amazing visionary. I had the honor to see him speak earlier this spring when I was over in London, Mike, and Andy just rocked the house, was amazing, and all I kept writing down to myself is, I hope, Andy, we can invite him and he would agree to come on Green is Good. Welcome to Green is Good, Andy.
Thanks very much. What an intro.
Andy is he is the co-founder of the award-winning environmental movement Green Thing, which every one of our listeners can go look at right now. If you've got your laptop or your iPad or your computer, you could see his great work at dothegreenthing.com, a wonderful website. It inspires people to lead a greener life, and that's what this whole show is about, Andy. And thank you for coming on. And like I said, I was inspired by you when I was in London earlier this year, and we just are so excited to have you on to share your inspirational vision with our listeners today.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for the invitation again. It's lovely to be on.
So what is this deal with the Green Monster? Tell us about the Green Thing and the Green Monster and your amazing website. What's going on, and why did you start it, and where is it going?
Well, the Green Monster is, in fact, technically a green thing. That's why we thought with a name like Green Thing we needed something that defined a thing. So it's pretty difficult to describe, but it's got a couple of eyes and a number of arms and legs, and it is our icon and our mascot. And we called it Green Thing because there seem to be so many phrases and words to use about the environment, and so many of them use the word green, and there's sustainability and so on and so forth. And we just thought that most people tend to use the language of this green thing or doing the green thing, and so we thought that was a good overall catch-all phrase to sum up the movement that we wanted to try and stimulate. And so it just seemed right to have a green thing as the mascot, so that's our monster. And we try and, as you said, really, the same as you guys do, we try and create a sort of a force of inspiration to make people actually want to lead a more sustainable life. So in a sense, to turn environmental behavior from something that people feel they should do, which I think everyone feels they ought to do, but to actually turn it to something that people want to do. And I think there's a big difference in life between the stuff that we feel we should do and gets put in that pile of must get round to that later, and it's kind of to do with chores and admin. And the stuff that we really want to do is in kind of a different part of our brains. It's about pleasure and leisure and fulfillment. So we were trying to figure out when we started Green Thing, why will people queue round the block for an iPad, but they can't be bothered to turn off the lights when they leave a room? And we figured actually it's about inspiration. One thing inspires them to want to do it, and the other doesn't. So how could we use that same force of inspiration to make environmental living something that people actually actively wanted to do?
So it's really not about guilting people into doing the right thing, but leading them in the right direction where they get that aha moment, and the light bulb, hopefully a compact fluorescent light bulb, goes off in their head, and they say, aha, I want to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why we also feel quite passionately about using creativity as a tool to do that, because creativity can do quite magical things and can pick people up in one place and put them down in another place that's not necessarily a linear journey. So it can really transport people and make them rethink things. And I think we felt that the world really needs a positive vision of sustainable living, because I think right now a lot of people feel that greener living is a life with less. It's a life without all the things that they've grown up to feel that they need and they should aspire to. And in fact, if you just change the perspective on that story, it can be about a life with more creativity and resourcefulness and health and happiness, community and society and so on. And I think that's the thing what we're trying to do, is to do our bit to make sustainable living seem like actually a kinder, friendlier, smarter way to be.
You know, Andy, after I heard you speak in London, I went back to my hotel and I pulled up your website. I fell in love with your website, dothegreenthing.com, for our listeners out there. And on the website, you have, again, 7 things you can do to lead a greener life. And I want you to walk our listeners through. We are a solution-based show. You are a solution-based person, visionary, and also have a creator. And so we would like you to walk our listeners through the 7 things you can do to lead a greener life as per your great website.
Well, thanks. I'd be happy to do that. I mean, one point to make is that what we try and do, and I don't know if this is of interest to listeners generally, but
Sure.
we try and be, while we have the website as our home, if you like, we also are on Twitter, Do the Green Thing, and Facebook and YouTube and so on. So we try and be in as many different places as we can be, so that people can get us in the way that's easiest for them.
Absolutely.
So the website is one of those places, but ideally we want to try and be kind of distributed on the web. We've got seven actions because we have an advisory board with some really interesting environmental thinkers, and we went through when we started and mapped out the areas which have most consumer impact in terms of consumer actions that have the most, the most carbon-intensive impact on the environment.
Sure.
And all of those areas are, of course, things like energy and transportation and food and waste and water. But what we tried to do is give those language, those territories, if you like, in a way that was more inspiring and more creatively fertile. So in transportation, we have an action called Walk the Walk, and it's really about getting from A to B without making any C. So Walk the Walk is about driving less and walking more and using sustainable forms of transportation. The food one is called Easy on the Meat. So it's not about, not having a hamburger for the rest of your life, but just going easy a bit. And livestock agriculture is actually the 3rd biggest contributor to global warming when you add in all of the water that's used in the grain and the deforestation and the transportation and energy use and so on.
Wow.
And, of course, the methane that comes out of the cattle. And the 3rd action is stick with what you got, which is really, the classic chain of reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yes.
And stick with what you've got is really about reduce, as in just thinking before you buy something, do you really need it? Or is it just something that you've been led to believe you need because it's going to somehow make you cooler and happier, and in fact, it'll give you a quick fix, but then it won't really change your life at all. So better to just stick with the stuff you have and look for happiness in perhaps other places other than the local shop. The 4th one is called Human Heat, which is about turning down the central heating or air conditioning if it's in the summer, and using kind of natural things. So rather than using heating all the time, perhaps put on a jumper or have a cuddle with that special person in your life, or open a window and do other things you can to
We like that.
And the 5th one is called All-Consuming, which is really about the art of wasting nothing and using up everything. So it's simply the idea of when you buy something, use it up to the end. Don't throw it away and just buy the latest new thing just because it's out there, but use it up to the end and think about what's wasted and what's not. The 6th is Stay Grounded, which is about flying, which is, I think, a big one, particularly in America. I'm not sure people think about it as much as maybe they do in the UK, but flying is, has probably the single biggest carbon impact that you can make. So sometimes you need to fly because it's a big world, but quite often there are other ways you can get around: train, boat, car, and so on, that are much less carbon intensive. And the 7th one is Plug Out, which is energy use, which I think we're all familiar with. Don't kind of leave it on or put it on if you can. Sometimes just lead a life less plugged where you can.
Wow. I mean,
hopefully that explains the 7 territories. But just one thing to say, we try and not use those in a dogmatic way, but we use those almost as our blueprint behind the scenes, and then we try and fire out ideas and campaigns and products that just make people smile and think and engage them without necessarily being very sort of didactic about these are the prescribed things you must do.
Which is
we try and inspire people rather than sort of educate them, if you like,
or scare them. Which is
scaring. I mean, there's plenty of things out there that will scare them. And sometimes that's necessary. But the research shows that people tend to be paralyzed rather than mobilized when you scare them.
That is...
People just go, you know what, I can't do anything about this, so I'm just going to ignore it.
And, Andy, John and I have discussed that so many times with so many of our guests that really, when it's like eating an elephant, you have to do it one bite at a time. But when it comes to being paralyzed by what can look like just monumental ecological disaster, people just freeze up. And John, why don't you quote? There's a great quote that, Andy, I would love for John to share with you right now from one of his professors in law school, a man named Gideon Cantor. This is great.
Yeah, and Gideon used to tell us when faced with these monumental tasks, he said, refer to the top of a 1950s mayonnaise jar, which used to say, stay cool, but don't freeze. Keep cool. Yeah. Keep cool, but don't freeze. I always mess it up, but keep cool, but don't freeze. And that's what you're saying. Keep cool, let's move forward, but don't freeze.
Yeah, I think it's... Yeah, I know, I completely agree with that. And I think, when it's really interesting when you dig into some of the psychological studies and the research on what motivates people to do stuff. And it really is often the positive aspect. So even in sort of health studies, it's really weird when people have, heart attacks and crazy, major life events. Often that doesn't necessarily, just telling them that they're going to die if they don't change their lifestyle doesn't always get people to change their lifestyle, amazingly enough. But when you tell people that there's actually a positive vision of these are all the things you'll be missing, and spending time with your grandchildren and getting people to focus on the positive stuff in life tends to be much more motivating than simply trying to scare them with the potential downsides, because for some reason psychologically people find that easier to evade. So that's part of the reason we try to use positivity, but also creativity is a way where if you can do things that delight people and engage them and make them really transport them in terms of the way they think, you're almost changing the narrative. You're changing their perspective on the issue, and rather than scare them or even inspire them so much, you're actually making them choose to want to do something. Well, and if people want to do it, then they will.
And that's why I was so impressed by your comments in London, because you were inspirational and you were creative, and it wasn't I didn't feel any of the politics of fear, which so many other speakers are right now trading in. And so, which leads me to the point why I love your website and why Mike and I are so inspired by it. And Mike's on it now. I've been on it many times since hearing you. DoTheGreenThing.com for our listeners out there. Talk a little bit about, now you gave the 7 steps that are the blueprint, but talk a little bit about what that leads into. What do you mean by the campaigns and products in terms of deliverables by what you are doing? What does campaigns and products mean with regards to the Green Thing?
Well, there's a good example. We talked about the first action that I mentioned about walk the walk.
Yes.
So try and drive less and walk more, or use bicycles or other sort of low-carbon forms of transport where you can. And one of the things that we did is we thought that for a campaign that driving really has a soundtrack to it, like drive time radio is a whole kind of music category that is evolved to provide a musical soundtrack to putting your foot down on the accelerator and bombing down Route 66 or whatever as the mythology has it. We thought there isn't really a soundtrack to walking, so we created a campaign where we got a bunch of musicians, all from the Big Chill label, which is a music label in the UK, to write a series of songs, musical compositions at 105 beats per minute. So we figured that was the optimal pace for walking. We decided this about 3 a.m, walking around the kitchen table. And so we created a walkcast, which is an hour's worth of downloadable free music that you can put in your MP3 player and then just walk around town to, and it gives you a different experience of walking.
How cool is that?
One example. We actually did a similar thing with taking shorter showers. So the idea of conservation of water, but also of energy. We got some bands to, if you're in the shower and you sing Bohemian Rhapsody or Sweet Child of Mine or something, you'll be in there for quite a long time. Right. So we figured if you want people to take a shorter shower, you need to give them a shorter song they can sing. So we've got a bunch of bands to write 30-second shower songs. And so we created a shower cast. You can download it hear some great new songs that you can sing in 30 seconds and get in and out pretty quickly, but still wash everything that matters. We created a campaign for waste, which is one of my favorite, called Glove Love, where we noticed that when people lose gloves in the cold weather, they often leave them lying around the place because everyone feels if you see a lost glove that there's something quite sad about it and it should be reunited with its partner.
Right.
And so we decided, well, the problem is every time you lose a glove, you throw the other one away because it's useless, and you also buy a new pair. So there's a double waste. You've got waste that goes into landfill plus new resources being used. So what we did is we collected these single gloves. We get users to send them in, our members, as well as people like museums and theaters and transportation organizations. And they send in the lost property of the gloves. We wash them and repair them and sew in labels to the left and right, and we match them up to create new sustainable pairs. So we match up kind of large gloves, small gloves, medium, and we match up the colors so they're not the same, but they're actually aesthetically very pleasing, and they're a new pair of Glove Love pairs that have found each other. And I think that's a really lovely idea that not only inspires you to think differently about waste, but also is actually a product that you can wear that helps signal to people around you that actually there's a different way of thinking about things and living.
Wow.
That is brilliant.
Unbelievable. Each one of those are just amazing. I mean, Mike and I are sitting here and our jaws are open, Andy. This is just, that's why, how simple is everything that you're saying, but how intuitive and relevant to the times that we live in.
Well, I hope so. It's in a way, we have a lot of fun doing it, but we're also keep trying to find the thing that's going to travel, going to be spreadable, and something that's going to get into people's heads and that will really make them act differently. And I heard this the other day that I thought was really nice, is that sometimes it's easier to get people to act their way into a new way of thinking than to think their way into a new way of acting.
Wow.
So a lot of the things we try and do is to design to get people to just act first, and then kind of think about it after, if you like, rather than a whole series of kind of education where you need to rethink things and then figure out what you need to do differently. Just make it so desirable and delightful that people want to do it, and then once their behavior's changed, their thinking can change along with it. If that makes sense.
Hey, Andy, if I got on an elevator with you today and we were going to the 15th floor and I recognized you and I said hi and then I said, Andy, I heard you speak in London a couple months ago, but I want you, and we were both just had literally 18 to 30 seconds together. What would be the one thing that sums up the green thing in that elevator ride? What's one thing how do you describe it best?
Well, for one thing, we'd obviously get out on the 10th floor and take the stairs for the other side. But during that time...
My bad.
I think, no, that's probably a bit extreme. But I suppose it would be our mantra is something we call creativity versus climate change. So it's really about using creativity to tell the other side of the story. So, a lot of creativity in our lives makes us live unsustainable lives, the way we get around and the things we buy and eat and throw away and the energy we use.
Right.
And we try and use creativity to create an equal and opposite force, which actually inspires people to lead a greener life. And so we do that with videos and images and music and fashion and stories from creative contributors around the world.
Gotcha. The green movement. Let's talk a little bit about the green movement and what's going on right now. I see it with my children. I have a 23-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they're on fire for the green. And it seems like wherever we go and we meet young people, they all are ready to take the baton from us and run with it as fast as they can. What are you seeing, and what do you think that movement is going to look like in the months and years ahead?
Well, I hope, one of the things I think that's really interesting is there's this tremendous, unharnessed energy, if you like, of young people. And I think one of the problems is the education system, it seems to me, spends quite a lot of time solving fictitious problems and addressing theoretical issues. And instead, if we focused on using the kind of creativity and the ingenuity of these minds and these passions to solve real-world problems, I think it would be an unbelievable untapped resource. I don't know if you've seen there's a book out by Clay Shirky called Cognitive Surplus, which just compares the amount of time people spend watching TV every year with the amount of time that it took to, say, create Wikipedia. And, you could create several thousand Wikipedias, many times over with the amount of time that people actually spend doing something passive like watching TV. So imagine if we could get real-world social and environmental challenges, and instead of the pursuit of academic fame or intellectual excellence for its own sake, actually use this creative resource in people's minds as they're learning to actually create ideas and solutions. There's a brilliant thing we came across recently that we're helping promote called Sugru, which is a product design student at the Royal College of Art in London, which is kind of like it's like a I don't know if you have blue tack in the States.
No, not that I know.
Or a Play-Doh or something.
Right.
It's like a Play-Doh that allows you to kind of fix anything that breaks.
Wow.
So if a handle breaks off a cup, or if you need to, fix something to your bike or the handle of your door, and what it does is it molds in and then it hardens at room temperature like rubber.
Wow.
So it's really this kind of brilliant invention where you just think, that's fantastic. It's almost like a new invention that helps you fix stuff rather than having to throw it away and buy new stuff.
Hey,
and
yeah, go ahead.
You know what I mean? If people could invent that, we had thousands of people inventing new ideas to solve problems, we'd be in a lot better state, I think.
Hey, Andy, unfortunately, we're down to the last minute or so, and I want to ask two quick questions here. You are amazing and inspirational to Mike and I know to all of our listeners. So, two questions. Who inspires you, and the future? Are you hopeful? Are you pessimistic? What's the future hold? We're down to the last 60 here, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. Well, there's lots of things that inspire me, and films like The Story of Stuff, or blog projects like The Uniform Project, where somebody wears the same piece of clothing, washed and so on every day with different outfits to show how creatively you can reinvent fashion. Campaigns like Twestival and so on. But I think ultimately it's new products like MBT shoes that have created a new way to walk, or Velib cycle system in Paris that actually makes it really easy to rent bicycles to get around town. These are really ingenious inventions. In terms of the future, I think there's a quote from Paul Hawken, who's a wonderful environmentalist, and when his quote, he says, "When I'm asked if I'm pessimistic or optimistic about the future, my answer is always the same. If you look at the science about what's happening and you aren't pessimistic, you don't understand the data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore this earth and the lives of the poor and you aren't optimistic, you haven't got a pulse."
Wow.
I think that about sums it up for me.
Yeah, that is an amazing close. And I just want to say thank you again, Andy. I want our listeners, please go to Andy's amazing website, dothegreenthing.com. Read more about what he's doing. Get involved. Get inspired. Andy Hobsbawm, you are a creative, inspirational, visionary genius and are truly living proof that green is good.